part of our membership who we know are inactive, but intentionally so. Okay. We also do see some members now coming back, so refugees back.
And I think you were here when we did make some really healthy advances talking to AIST about how we could deal with that, with maybe the regulator giving further guidance to the financial advisors. And this may be something you don't have a sense of, but of the members that have gone into SMSFs, are they more likely than not to be getting financial advice to do that? So is it sort of could be a potential questionable advice, or is it something that they still just want to have that sort of control and looking to invest in property themselves?
Yes, so we think it's an advice, often an advice-driven.
Okay.
Yes.
That's helpful to know. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for appearing. It's been incredibly helpful. I'm not sure we're going to be able to. We look forward to getting your post-draft report submission, and we might have to come back to you because there are some issues that you've raised that we want to make sure that any policy changes we finalise don't have the unintended consequences. And you have raised a couple today that are very important, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Right, I'd like to call our next participant who has the lucky time slot of coming between us and a sandwich from the Grattan Institute. Morning, Jim. Seems you've been at this table before for us.
Angela, hi. Morning.
Thank you. Just for the purposes of the transcript recording, Jim, if you could just state your name and organisation.
Yeah, my name's Jim Minifie. I'm at the Grattan Institiute.
Jim, did you want to make some opening remarks? Then we'll get into a bit of a discussion.
Yes. So overall, having carefully reflected on your report, I'm broadly supportive of your cost and efficiency assessment of the system. And I think that the recommendations that the PC are putting forward have got the prospect of making quite a significant positive difference for members in the system. Just to break that down a little bit more, I think your assessment about the fact that average costs are higher than they need to be, there's a very significant tail of underperformance, that that underperformance is driven by a combination of excess fees and underperformance at the asset level, that inactive accounts are having a particularly strong impact on younger members and members with lower balances, are all look very well supported. Your observations that in general the default or workplace segment of the system on average performs better than the choice or advised part of the system it also looks correct. And I just make the observation that I think this would be consistent with what's in the report, that it's really quite striking that the level of underperformance persists despite a very clear legal obligation on the part of trustees and board members. And so that's why I think what I perceive as a combination of interlocking complementary policies designed to shift the basis of competition and improve the quality of competition are well-founded. Now, having said that, there are still some questions in my mind about whether alternatives might be better with a different risk profile. And so therefore I can see that there's a program of work that might be valuable to dovetail into what I'm sure you've already got planned over the next few months. So perhaps I could just make some observations about that. In some sense, the question at this stage in the report from my point of view is whether PC's recommendations to, if you like, more vigorously shape the sector by shifting the basis of competition in defaults towards net performance through a shortlisting process, through aggressively moving to prevent the proliferation of unintended multiple accounts, to toughen up authorisation, including potentially making the prospect much more real that a MySuper product might lose authorisation for underperformers, and then finally a set of programs to make better and more salient information available for those in the choice or advice part of the market. The question really is, do all of those combination of reforms have a strong likelihood of making things better and a very low likelihood of making unintended negative consequences? And so I've tried to give some thought to those observations. And that's led to, I guess, a set of arenas where I think more work could be done. I think the first one is around just really strengthening the analysis around the extent to which shifting the control of the super system away from the industrial system and employers does have unintended consequences. Now, you've heard from several other of your discussions over the last couple of days, observations on which on dimensions on which this might have unintended consequences, and I think those are worthy of additional attention. I mean, my sense is, on balance, that the risks are of relatively small unintended consequences, but nevertheless, I think further work would be justified in that area. Just to give you one example, there's a sort of an interesting tension about how the representative board or trustee membership structure on industry funds will increasingly drift away from the membership over time. So that if you're a member of an employer association or a union and you're on the board or a trustee of an industry super fund, over time, as the link between your membership and your, if you like, your institutional base drifts further, as it's likely to do under the proposed shortlisting model, there is a question about whether that's a good outcome and whether that's something that requires further thought about the governance of those funds. Now, obviously, you've put forward a set of recommendations about the value of increasing the expertise quotient on some of those boards that might be complementary to that. Just another sub-point around this breaking the link with the workplace. Others have made the observation, but the Fair Work panel has never been implemented, and I think it's, just from an analytical perspective, worth going through the exercise of comparing a Best in Show model to what might come out of a Fair Work process. And you can imagine that there would be a shortlist, there would be some improvement, but the coverage is not necessarily going to be as great. The competitive tension might not be as great, but there may be some upsides in terms of matches to particular occupational requirements. And similarly, although on a somewhat different dimension within this overall category around the links to employers, when you come to evaluate whether assisted employee choice is better than assisted employer choice, I think a bit more work could be done to try to understand the way that employer-driven retirement, defined contribution retirement systems have developed elsewhere could be valuable. So one observation that we came across in our work is that there has been quite a significant decline in average costs in the 401k sector in the US. There's still quite a big dispersion. And what's driven that decline and supports that continuing dispersion and the relative prospects, I guess, in an Australian context, I think it's worth just trying to spell out a bit more clearly. I think the second area that is worth some more analytical attention would be around understanding the contribution of different components, fees and gross returns to net investment returns. We did some, admittedly not fully comprehensive work, that suggested that the persistent component of gross investment returns was relatively small, particularly once you control for asset allocation, and then even more so once you control for factor exposures, whereas fees are strongly persistent over time, both at the investment product level, the wholesale level, and obviously at the consumer level, the member level, including admin fees. And the reason why this is of more than just academic interest is it speaks directly to the weight that you might put on those different dimensions in designing the shortlisting process. So there might be a point of view that says, well, look, you know, I've seen you've performed really badly over time, and so you're not going to make the shortlist. But if by contrast, there's a fund that's performed very well over time, but we know that there's evidence that they've taken significant investment risks. Then you might not want to give that gross investment performance a lot of weight. And there are ways to investigate this in the data that could be valuable and materially affect the weight that you ought to apply to different components. That's my second sort of major point around potential additional work that might be done. I'll skip over some other observations which perhaps we could pick up.
That'd be good, Jim,
offline.
because if I had my debate as well, I would have done it about 5 minutes ago.
That's right. So the third point would be around the likely effects of the proposed model. And here, I think it'd be very, very valuable, and you've received this feedback from others, to refine and stress test that model further by showing the impact of how many funds you're choosing, the period of assessment, the weight of fees versus performance in different periods, the use of benchmarks versus absolute performance, consideration of the impact of whether you're looking just at new entrance to the workforce or a broader set. And all of these things can be simulated, and you could give greater confidence to decision makers about the likely effects of their decisions if you were to do that. Then the final point that I'd just like to make is around more work that could be done around reforms to improve outcomes in the choice or advised part of the market. And here, while I think your recommendation is very sensible, there's a question about whether they go far enough, because my reading, at least, of the evidence around engagement is that there's not much evidence that more informed or better information does lead to better decision making at the consumer level. And I think just being realistic about whether more work is required along advisor obligations in particular might be a stronger tool in that space. So those are my sort of opening shots, if you like.
Terrific, Jim. Thank you. You always set us homework when you come to a pair, but let's see how we go at setting some for you as well in your post-draft report submission. And look, I should have said at the outset, and on behalf of the Commission, thank you and Grattan Institute so much for your constructive engagement and involvement throughout not even just the 3 stages of this inquiry, but some of our precursor work around post-retirement super and housing decisions of older Australians. Your involvement in the technical roundtables where we sort of tried to wrestle the beasts of how we could compare apples and zebras. So for that, we are very grateful. Coming, I guess, first to a point that you've made, and it's something that we've thought about, but we haven't really put to people in the hearings so far. When we did our fund governance survey, 85% of the fund CEOs said they do regular performance attribution analysis. And indeed, the benchmark portfolio analysis that we did is kind of like basic performance attribution analysis so funds are doing this, they say 85% of them. They do it for their own products and their own performance. We did it by system, segment, fund and product, and that's what was new and novel. So if we take what the fund CEOs said as truthful, and we are, that would suggest that the trustee boards of all the persistently underperforming funds know that they are persistently underperforming funds, and they've been persistently underperforming funds and products for 10 to 12 years. So that then raises a really stark question of what is it about our system that hasn't meant that they haven't exercised their trustee duties in recognising that their performance isn't up to scratch for their members. And indeed, if they were exercising those duties, they would have shepherded their members to a better performing fund.
So I haven't participated in those internal processes of the funds. You could imagine that potentially an individual fund might form the belief that if they were successful in growing so that they're able to achieve the benefits of scale, and if they're able to improve their gross performance, that they would realise their obligations to members fully. And perhaps there's a bias towards optimism there. And I think there is also a question that's raised just about the effectiveness of the regulation, which ought to be ensuring that those funds are being realistic rather than optimistic.
Yeah. The other point that you raised about, and I'll group the two together, the role of the industrial relations system and funds in terms of the not-for-profit governance model. and then also the relative merits of assisted employer choice versus assisted employer choice. Firstly, we've now had evidence from the employer representative organisations that employers want out. They want out. So we now have a system where there are still some groups that want it all to stay within the industrial relations system, but employers do not want to be involved in making the decisions on behalf of their employees. So if we take at face value what those representative groups are telling us, we're getting a signal that employers no longer want to be doing that. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that this afternoon with another inquiry participant. So that's today's modern reality. On the drift of governance, I could see a situation where the drift of governance would change with a not-for-profit in the current IR system if it stopped being a not-for-profit and became a trustee board within a for-profit mothership. I could see that drift changing. But we already see in the current governance models of the industry funds that there are some unicorns that actually don't follow the same. There's one in particular I'm thinking of that doesn't have that traditional representation. They're a high-performing fund. They are an industry fund, but they've already drifted, and yet it hasn't affected their performance. So if they still retain the trustee entity of a not-for-profit, and we know that there are a lot of good-performing not-for-profit entities in other areas of endeavour and activity, does that sort of address your concerns? Or is the concern that it might drift if they then became part of a mothership with for-profit?
Well,
I'm just trying to work out.
So it's not so much, I would just put, others have made this observation, it is quite striking that there's a large average difference in performance between for and not-for-profit systems and funds in our system, and that I think is worth reflecting on why that is. Now, I'm purely observing that if you transitioned the basis, if you like, the basis of allocating members to products away from the industrial system, but the governance structures remain linked to the industrial system, at a certain point, you have to ask the question, well, why do I have a particular composition of those boards on those funds? And so you'd want to weigh, and I suspect your recommendation is to move towards more expertise-based. Remaining non-profit may well be the best answer.
And we don't make any recommendations about the nomination processes, or indeed we don't make any recommendations about the number of independent directors. We have views and findings about what we think might be best practice to manage conflicts. But at the end of the day, where we've focused on is making sure that there's transparency and accountability around those trustee board members being the best in show themselves, with the right skills and expertise, and free of conflict, and we're not free of conflict, very transparent around related party. But do you think, you mentioned before that some of the governance areas you didn't think we'd gone far enough. Do you think we've gone far enough in that area?
So look, I haven't done as much in our work. We didn't do a lot of analysis of the governance structure. So I wouldn't regard myself as really expert to make that assessment.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned was contemplating FWC as legislated as opposed to FWC as practiced. And we did actually do that in the report. And I think the two key things that were three things that were missing in action for us there, even if it was done as legislated, it still doesn't introduce competition for default. It's still not an accountable body to the government of the day. And its DNA is different in terms of how it makes decisions. It doesn't weed out underperformers, and it only looks at what's presented by the interested parties. It doesn't do its own evidence and analysis. So we actually want an expert panel to basically do their own analysis when assessing the selection criteria for best in show, to not just take what's provided to them as evidence of, here's our proposal, take it at face value and now make a decision, without actually robustly doing their own analysis around that. So,
look, I think there's a strong case to do that, but just as from my point of view, just in terms of crossing your T's and dotting your I's, I think to the extent that you can flesh out, substantiate the likely performance under those alternative systems and compare them, really explicitly, that just gives the senior decision makers a lot of confidence that they understand those trade-offs in as quantified a way as possible.
And you're right in saying that we have to be very careful with the criteria that the best in show expert panel applies, that we address any unintended consequences. And indeed, we've got about a page at the moment of how we see them working. And if you've got any thoughts and feedback on how we can bolster those to make sure we avoid those unintended consequences, and we know we're going to be hearing that from others, that would be really helpful. On the issue of better information making, better decision making, I guess we're saying at the moment, super's a world where comparability is an impossibility. So the role of best in show, the role of a one-page product dashboard, the role of getting rid of the tail of underperformers is to consolidate the system, get some comparability, but at the end of the day, we still don't expect a member to go and have a look at 60 My Super product dashboards. A best in show allows two things. It allows a member a reference point, a trusted reference point, but it also allows, this is a point that Angela keeps bringing home, it allows the advisors a reference point. So say you're in a world of FOFA with ASIC, if questionable advice is occurring in the choice segment, it could be a case of if not, why not? So why with that client did you recommend them to go into this choice product when there's a best in show?
Yeah, I agree that would be an improvement over today's situation. Although having said that, it's not hard to find that your products have been dominated, and that doesn't seem to have prevented a lot of members in that advised part of the market staying in dominated products. On
your point around fees and costs and persistence, we found our analysis came to the same landing that your good analysis, indeed we leveraged your good analysis and how we approach doing our analysis as well, that where there are high fees, they do persist over time, and there is an ugly tail there. But what we did find with our distributional analysis of performance over time, and albeit it's just a 12-year period, is the distribution's too wide, and there's persistent underperformance that you would not expect in a market that's operating properly.
Right, at the gross level, because the spread is much bigger than what you would get just from fees.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, we're doing net investment returns, exactly. So, so there's more at play here than just a bad fee story in explaining the underperformance. Indeed, we know that the egregious fee tail is large. Well, it's 100% retail. Yeah. So we know that that's a retail story. Yet when we looked at the persistent underperformance, particularly in the default segment, it was 12 retail, 10 industry, and then the others. It was worse in the choice segment. That was more dominated by the retail segment than it was by others. But yeah, so I just make two observations. That if you have a very, very undiversified investment strategy, you may do very well for a period or very, very badly for a period, and that might tend to reverse over time. And if you think about this, if you like, the performance of different funds with different strategies fanning out over time, you'll have a combination of these kind of growing tails of very persistent under and overperformers. Some of the super performers are taking inappropriate risks. And I guess the reason why, to my mind, this is very important is you want to make sure that your performance incentive system is providing a steady incentive for continual appropriate management of risk, as well as for good performance. But if we have the net investment performance over a long enough period of time, Jim, we've corrected for those that might be taking an excessive risk strategy.
You'll get a few freaks even then at the top, just as you do at the bottom of the distribution. That's the worry. And so let me give you an example.
But if it's over, say, a 20-year period and the net investment returns have been highest over a 20-year period, that can't be an inappropriate risk allocation.
Well, there
is 3.5 market cycles.
So there is still, that's right, there are going to be very, very few overperformers over that period of time, due to taking persistent excessive risks. That's true. But over shorter periods,
which is why it's important then for the best in show to be a very established track record over a longer term period, and then we make sure that the other principles around governance, innovation, fees and costs, understanding their membership, getting it right in accumulation, and means that they're more likely to continue that going forward for the best in show.
Yeah. Look, I think that's right. I don't think that the model that you've put forward poses significant risks of creating incentives to take inappropriate investment risks, but it's something that I think is just worth being as explicit about as you can.
And I think you're right, and others have suggested we probably need to be a bit more prescriptive in the criteria to guard against that.
Even if you're just putting forward a model that then the ultimate system is may deviate from, I think that'd be appropriate. And so I just want to emphasise again, to my mind, one of the important dimensions is around the applicable flows. I know you've discussed that in the report, you've had some discussions with people already, but there is a case to be made that says only making this product a default for new entrants to the workforce means that you're going to be phasing in over many decades. And is that the right case? Now, there's a case that says, look, it's a big complex system, it's been subject to repeated government policy changes over time, and so you want to do this in a progressive fashion. But the counter case would be, well, you're starting in year one with less than 1% of the inflows to the system. And so in the first decade, you might get 60 or 70 billion out of a system that by then is going to be 800 or 900 billion.
Well, yes and no. Others will suggest we're already going too far. But it is like the pebble in the pond, to quote a smart person sitting next to me. So think of it this way, your 10 best in show. So you've locked off your tail with your elevated My Super authorisation. So you've gotten rid of, hopefully, most of the entrenched underperformance. Then you throw the pebble in the pond with the best in show. It's not just the new job entrant that gets the benefit. There's people that are changing jobs and switching. Then it's anybody else that has their default with that best in show also gets all the benefits of what the best in show winner has offered. And then in the world of choice, all of a sudden you've got a trusted list of top performers and a world of FOFA where it's more difficult for financial advisors to put them in the underperforming products in the choice. I guess the question that hasn't been asked or posed to us and answered is, we've got a level of My Super authorisation for the default segment to make it a safe list of providers. We're relying on the market and the consumer to do that in the choice segment. We're hoping best in show will make it easier, but is that still going to be enough for the choice segment? And I think that's the group that you're more worried about in terms of the gradual impact of what we're proposing.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think, look, I would expect that you're going to have a modest impact in the choice part of the market. But it's possible that a real focus on advisor obligations and monitoring their compliance might make a difference in that space.
And indeed, I think it's hidden away in one of the chapters. I can't remember if we said it in the overview. We actually got ASIC on in writing saying best in show would actually be part of their guidance to advisors in the choice segment going forward under FOFA.
Sort of, if not, why not?
Yeah.
Can I just clarify one thing in your opening statement? You talked about the role of employers and the shift from employers and some concerns around that. I just wanted to clarify. So as I understood it, as you went on, you talked about the shift from sort of employers and unions in the governance structure. You weren't implying, were you, that you supported an employee choice model over an employee choice model? You still wanting the
No, look, I don't think so. So just to be clear, my observations are not really based on research that we've done that suggests that your recommendations are wrong. In fact, it's the reverse. Based on our research. It's much more based around what you can do to further stress test the recommendations. I think they're very solid recommendations, but I'm aware that there are areas where at least my confidence about the evidence is not as strong as a potentially senior decision maker would like. And I think in this context, there is a point of view that says an assisted employer choice would retain a degree of, if you think about it, I guess the more corporatist or institutionalised version, less individual choice version of the system would say, well, many firms will have an expert that's more across and is able to provide a bit more.
I think the idea of many firms is
look, I'm not saying that evidence. I'm not saying I think that's true, but similarly on the union side, I mean, you've already heard from people this morning arguing that there's a role that the industry funds can play in an occupational or an industry context, that would be difficult for a more detached or dispersed system to play. And I just think it's worth stress testing those.
Well, it's interesting because given our analysis, and we're not going to be prescriptive about who's going to invest in show, we'll work more on the criteria, but if the top performing funds are industry funds, the members will continue to be with them. Okie dokes. Jim, is there anything else that we haven't covered? I know we've covered a lot of ground.
No, I'm just aware of time.
So are we.
And we can follow up subsequently. So thank you very much, and congratulations to the team on putting together a good draft.
Thank you very much. Alrighty, folks, we're going to pause for a well-earned calorific break. We'll be resuming. Our next participant is 1:20, so if we could resume at 1:15 to make sure we're all here ready to roll, that would be great. Thank you. So is somebody going to take the lead on Grattan and